gentlemen, Father Hines and his great band playing for you from the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's Great South Side. Get ready now for 30 minutes of Super Jive.
Morning, everybody. Get ready for some Super Jive here from Earl Father Hines. Recorded live at the Grand Terrace Ballroom in Bronzeville. Miles. Morning, everybody. Morning, Martin. Miles, what are you on about? Morning, Bat, Karen, and Betsy. Hey, Deanne. Hey, Mary. Hey, Lisa. Hey, Dina. Morning, Chris. Mike. Hey, Edwina. Morning, Barbara and Jay and Gabriel. Hey, Kathy. Yep, Miles is right over here. Miles, here. Chase us to the room. There you go. Hey, Susan, Scott, Lorena, Robert, Alexandra, Christine, and Vicky. And Miles is being very jumpy today. Doing some of his best jump work. Hey, Kathleen, Toby, Mona, Gail, Larry, Dina. Hey, Alexandra and Robert. Hey, Susan, Scott. Hey, Todd over on Twitch. Hey, Susan, Lisa, and Jordana. Morning all around. All right. It's a hot one today. Hey, Vicky. Hey, Wendy. Hey, Ann. Morning, David and Annabelle. Hey, Tony. Morning, Angie and Melissa. Hey, Jennifer in Long Beach. Well qualified to represent the LBC. Tours in the air conditioning. That's just what I was thinking today when I listed for next Sunday. We're going to do the architectural virtual boat tour. Boat tour without the August heat. Or the parking charges or anything like that. Hey, David. Hey, Cindy. Heather, I envy rainy Kansas City right now. Well, not a couple hours from now we're doing the walking tour. Hey, Gina. Hey, Marita. Morning, Sarah. Hey, Bob. Hey, Bridget. Hey, Amber. Yeah, my brain was already melted by the time I got to the tour yesterday. I'd been down in Alsip for the cemetery thing. And that was, by the end of that, I was, if I seemed a little out of it yesterday, that's about why. Well, nobody enjoys paying the park. Hey, Heather. Hey, Karen. Morning, Mike. Yeah, wilted is a good word for it. By the end of the tour especially, hey, Betty. By the end of the day's tour, it'll probably be a similar situation. Maybe even more so. But there's less walking in today's. On the other hand, today's is one that I've never run in person before, so who knows? I'll have fun at the lakefront, Heidi. Hey, Pam. I'm going to mix this one up a little bit. Instead of doing it in geographical order like usual, I'm going to do the stories in chronological order today. That'll be a fun way to mix things up. Hey, Pam. Morning, Emily. Hey, Alana. Hey, Pam. Morning, Roy. Hey, Audrey. And hey, Ginger. Hey, Kansas. Candace and JD. Candace, I saw the mural at Wrigley View North, but just through the window so far. Hey, Octavio. Hey, Patty. Yeah, I'm watching the Delta stuff pretty carefully. I'm really hoping we don't have to, like, cut back on the in-person stuff, at least outdoors. But it's got me nervous. Well, look, if you're not to have a medical reason not to, you gotta get the vax. Don't kid me. I know there are valid questions, but the answers to the valid questions are all easier to Google than the anti-vax memes that go around. Hey, Laura. Hey, Carol. Hey, Heidi. I sure intend to stay hydrated. Morning, Diane. Oh yeah, well, if coffee does coffee count as hydration? Because I've had like 3 cups. Now I'm having tea. Well, they had some like vitamin mix. Hey, Maggie. Morning, John and Lisa. Hey, Bridget. Hey, Kristen. Hey, Bridget. Evidence in cases dropped. That is good news. Now, still, if you look at the numbers, in Chicago it has something like 3 cases per 100,000 people a day. Which, if you're vaxxed, that's not a whole lot to worry about, numbers-wise. Does Miles still look for Charlotte? I don't think so. He just needs someone to play with all the time. Hey, Marianne, yes, it is going to be very hot for the tour. Hey, Dan. Hey, Cindy. Hey, Gail. Hey, Marshan. It's cool to grow up on Taylor Street. Most of these stories will probably take place well before your time. I usually cut things off before most people alive would be around. It's kind of a trick. I mean, on Wednesday night, Mandy is doing the, over on effing Chicago, she's doing one on the Dunning Asylum. And we're getting these comments after comments where you better talk about this thing from the 70s when I lived there. It's like, we're not going that far. If you're going to a Dunning thing for nostalgia, I don't know what to tell you. Hey, Oriole. Hey, Cindy. Hey, Lindsay, Marcia, Natalie. Hey, Lenora. Hey, Susan. Ah, Dana, sorry to hear that. Sending good vibes. Morning, Grandma Bell. Morning, Amy. Hey, Maureen. Hey, Patty. Hey, Gladys. Morning, Jean. Give it another minute or so. Hey, Marilyn. Hey, Rob.
For the bow to Leroy Harris, for the words, we turn on now to the next two. Earl Father Hines gives us a bit of jive on the general heading of So Help Me.
Hey, Rob. Hey, Lori. Oh, Laura, for sure. Mario's Italian Ice is a neighborhood staple. It's a classic. Is Grandma Bell? No, Grandma Bell I don't believe has ever been on one of my in-person tours. She doesn't get up to Chicago much. Well, my parents have only been on a few. Morning, Eric. Now, October, we should be in much better shape for these sort of things. Now, Heather, I wouldn't say it's all Italian, but neighborhood definitely has a clear Italian vibe to it. Morning, Mom. Hey, Sue. Hey, Val. Ah, welcome back, Val. Did I scare you away with the frozen pants or what? Hey, Libby. Hey, Patty. Hey, Cheryl. Hey, Eleanor. Hey, Mars. I'll give Earl Father Hines a couple more minutes and let everybody get logged on, but I can't stick around too long today because I gotta go do the in-person tour this afternoon. Morning, John. Hey, Mike. Hey, Donna. No, I haven't watched Jolt yet. It looks kind of... I like the... all I know about it is the graphic, but the graphic looks tempting. I've been watching Never Have I Ever, the series that Mindy Kaling wrote. I was avoiding watching it because I thought it was based on a young adult novel, and I just don't do that. For my mental health, I stay away from as much young adult stuff as humanly possible since I stopped writing it. But no, it's just a sitcom and it's hilarious. Emily, yeah, so far, I mean, certainly the numbers for the Sunday ones have kind of dropped off a lot. Gina, depends on what decade you were in, but this has been, Taylor Street between Halstead and Ashland has been known as an Italian district for over a century now. Hey, Bridget. More Veronica. Sue, thanks for the offer, but Miles has more stuff than he knows what to do with. Amy, that's on Netflix. What's shaking with you, Steve? Hey, Kathleen. Okay, Earl Father Hines is wrapping up this tune. Hey, Scott! Scott's here, everybody!
Well, we're about halfway through this jive concert by Earl Father Hines and his orchestra, so now it can be told it's reaching you from the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's outside.
So, alright, everybody, that's a couple minutes after 10 o'clock. I think it's time we go ahead and get started. Welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for about 15 years now. I got about a dozen Chicago history books out. I'm on the History Channel, the Travel Channel all the time, so I am incredibly famous. Among those stories are Flickering Empire, how Chicago invented the U.S. film industry, H.H. Holmes, the true history of the White City Devil, and perhaps most relevant for today, Mysterious Chicago, the book. Now, when I was a walking tour guide, when I was exclusively a walking tour guide, I had to be really, really careful about geography. I could gather all the stories I wanted, but if they weren't all close together, I couldn't really use them for much. It's part of why I like cemetery tours so much, is that's where pretty much all of the stories end up. But there are certain stretches of road where I just found story after story over the course of a tight enough place, and one of those is West Taylor Street, just south of the Loop, between Halstead and Ashland. It's just a little bit the near west side of the city, in an area that's been known as an Italian neighborhood for many years. It's sometimes called Little Italy, but also there's a lot of people from the University of Illinois at Chicago who live around there. A lot of, one time I gave a lift ride to a guy there who was a member of like a fourth generation garbage family. His family was in the garbage business, and apparently there's a whole scene there of garbage families and a lot of pressure for the young people to marry into another garbage family and keep all of the garbage stuff in the family. It's like, I don't want to get involved in the particular battles that the garbage families might have. But I'm going to mix things up a little bit today. Yesterday we did this as an in-person tour, but the trouble with this as an in-person tour is that it kind of bounces around chronologically. Like the first story comes from 1918, then you jump to the 1920s, then back to the 1910s, because that's walking tours. It's kind of dictated by the geography. So today, what I have done for the virtual tour is I rearranged the stops so the stories are going to go chronologically, but all taking place between about a little bit of Halstead Street around Taylor, then stretching down Taylor about a mile west to Ashland Street. But for the most part, we're going to just stick in chronological order today. I think that'll be an interesting way to do it. So we are going to start at 1049. West Taylor, just about midway, about a fourth of the way between Taylor and Ashland. You can see a little shot of Mario's Italian Ice right there. But over in this section, back in the 1890s, there was a house built by a guy by the name of Peter Fanning. It would have stood right about here. It's the one you see with the low brick wall in front of it. I'm not sure when it was torn down. It was a really long time ago in any case. But old man Peter Fanning was a miser by most accounts. At least that's how neighborhood legend described him, and the records bear this out. He was a stonemason by trade, but he seems to have sued people a lot. The legal archives are just full of records of him suing people for very small amounts. So the story goes he bought this plot of land here on Taylor Street, intending to build himself a fortress, the nicest house you could see anywhere. He got as far as building the basement, which included a massive vault full of all of his riches, and he got as far as building the stone wall that you can still see in front of it here. It's not the best picture in the world, it's just the best picture I've found of it. But after he had built the stone wall and the vault, he died, and told his daughters that they must continue to build his plans and must remember to protect his wealth. But they didn't do it. Instead, they built a very ordinary yellow brick house in front of on the spot, keeping the brick wall. But the story went after that the place was cursed. There's an article about it from far away. This became one of the most famous haunted houses in Chicago. This is The Hoodoo is No Dream. A place, a guy tried to start a tavern inside of the place and got scared away by the ghost. The saloon keeper was looked upon as a brave man by the citizens along West Taylor when a fortnight ago he ventured to open a place in the hoodooed neighborhood. He now declares that he thinks he has made a mistake, for he says that from the first all went wrong. Now, there was even stories for a long time about seeing the ghost of old man Peter Fanning, a bent-over old specter wandering around the grounds. And they said for a long time that the place was now cursed. But for years they said any business that opened there would be doomed to fail, but now apparently the curse is lifted because Al's Italian Beef has been doing a great business there for years and years now. Now, maybe there was a curse, but maybe he just didn't have the energy to make a curse that would last. It wore out after a while. So that's the 1890s. We'll move on to the turn of the 20th century and swing down the road just a little bit here. Up to the 1240 block, roughly 2 blocks down. But this was the site of the Sacred Heart Convent. That was the home of a group of semi-cloistered nuns. Semi-cloistered means that they were theoretically, occasionally allowed to leave the convent. Fully cloistered ones never did. Semi-cloistered could for a real serious emergency. But it wasn't unusual to hear about them not leaving for like 30 years at a time. They certainly didn't leave for something as frivolous as, say, funerals. So, the city allowed them to bury the nuns who died there on the grounds. This was the last private burial ground in the city of Chicago. All of the other ones were closed down around the time of the Great Chicago Fire, and everybody was moved to like Graceland and Rose Hill Cemetery. But, turn of the 20th century, well, for one thing, they closed the convent down and moved everybody up to the North Shore, but they used the old grounds to become a Jewish facility. In addition to being an Italian neighborhood, there was also a strong Jewish presence here in the early 20th century. But the word went around that one of the Mothers Superior who had died was now haunting the place because she was so mad that it was becoming a Jewish facility. So large crowds came to see the ghost in the window, and this being the early 20th century, when people saw a ghost in those days, their instinct was always to shoot at it. A couple of the windows of the place got shot out by people taking pot shots at the ghostly nun. Now, I'm not Catholic, but I don't think I would take a shot at a nun, even if she was already dead, and even if she was coming back to life strictly for anti-Semitic purposes. But beyond the ghost stories, around the same time they had moved all of the bodies, including the body of Mother Gathro and Mother Galway, pictured here. And well, for one thing, the crowd around the convent with the mob, I remembered I got this. Mother Galway said to return 5,000 people crowded around this place to take these shots. But when they dug the bodies up, they found that Mother Galway and Mother Gathro were said to have turned into stone. Now, this is not that well documented, but it made a lot of news at the time, and they even published in the Chicago Daily News this whole explanation for how this might happen. So they didn't mean that like the bodies had turned very stiff as a statue. It means the story went that they had turned into several thousand pounds of what appeared to be marble. Now, the more scientific explanation is generally the what we call adipoker, which is more known as grave wax, which is a really fancy way of saying that your body kind of turns into cheese. But the thousands of pounds that they're talking about here, that would have been an awful lot of adipoker. They were moved supposedly up to Calvary Cemetery, though I've gotten reports off and on that they might be in some other graveyard someplace else. I've never found the Sisters of the Sacred Heart plot that these two would be in up at Calvary Cemetery. Still looking for that one. Zipping back a little ways. So that was about 1903. You can see we had, a lot of superstition in the neighborhood. When you changed the convent to a Jewish facility, people would come to take shots at the ghostly nuns. Meanwhile, down around the corner, back on Halstead, between Taylor and Polk, stood Hull House. Built in 1856 by Charles and Millicent Hull. By 1889, it had been taken over by Jane Addams, who turned it into what we now call a settlement house. Eventually, they would expand it to be about 13 buildings. This is the original one, just restored back to about what it would have looked like in the 1960s. If you look at pictures of the big Hull House facility from the height of its popularity, you can just kind of see the bones of this one mixed into it. They had added a third floor and built buildings all around it on every side, and this was kind of just incorporated in. But this became a settlement house, a place where people could get support, get job skills training, see a play, things instead of just going to a saloon, which at the time Jane Addams moved in, Charles Hull's day, this was a country house. By the time Jane Addams moved in 30 years later, the house was thought to be absolutely ancient, even though it was only about 30 years old, and was surrounded by saloons and funeral homes on either side. But this became a beacon of hope in the neighborhood. Jane Addams ended up winning a Nobel Peace Prize. Pretty much invented American social work here. But in 1913, they almost had to shut down operations after a rumor went around that somewhere inside of the place they were hiding some sort of devil baby. Now, exactly how this happened depended on who was telling the story, but usually it was something like, a woman in the neighborhood gave birth to 7 daughters. And when she became pregnant again, her husband flew into a rage and said, I would rather have the next one be the devil than another girl. And according to the story, she got her wish. The baby was born with bright red scaly skin, horns, hooves, and a tail. And the story even went that when they brought this thing to Hull House, intending to just drop it off on the doorstep, they passed a priest along the way. Or a minister or a rabbi, depending on who was telling the story. And the kid, this 2-day-old baby, jumped out of his father's arms, grabbed the clergyman's cigar, and started tap dancing and cussing the guy out in 3 to 4 languages. Now, we tend to snicker at this these days, but it was the kind of story people took very seriously at the time, and this wasn't the first time it had happened. I mean, the story of its origin is very similar to the origin story for the Jersey Devil out in New Jersey. This picture is the devil baby of Cleveland when the same thing had happened in 1888. It was also known to have happened in D.C. around the time, Atlanta around the same time, Indiana just a couple of years ago. And Jane Addams was initially just furious that all these thousands of people were believing that they were putting this devil baby on display to teach people a lesson. And early on, she said, 3 men knocked at the door and said, we're here to see it. We've got money, same as everybody else. And she said, even if there had been some baby like that born here, do you really think we would charge admission to see it? And they said, well, it would teach a good lesson, right? And she had to kind of reflect on how strange the institution may have seemed to a lot of people. This was providing education, but it wasn't just Bible study. This was all women living in the house together, and even at the time, people were not completely ignorant about things like that. Jane herself lived here with her partner, Mary Roget Smith. But eventually she came to realize that a lot of these people were old women. These were old women who had come over from the old country. Their sons Giuseppe and Enrique were now their sons Joseph and Henry. Their grandchildren didn't speak the same language they did, and the families tended to be really kind of ashamed of the old women. But once the old women heard a story like this, like, aha, now you're on my territory. Now, this was something that they didn't get very often, something that made them feel that they had a little bit of power over their families here. So that was 1913. We're going to move ahead 3 more years back onto Taylor Street in the 1120 block. Now, by the 1910s, this neighborhood was known as a hotbed of corruption and crime, especially in the local politics. Organized crime had not really taken off at the time, not the way we think of it now. There were like hold-up crews and what we called black hand groups, people who would like do extortion through the mail, but they weren't organized in the sense that we would start to see during Prohibition. Really, it was just like gangs of guys who occasionally committed crimes together and hid out together and helped each other out, because to live outside the law, you must be honest. But for years, the main power in the neighborhood was a ward committeeman named Anthony D'Andrea. Anthony D'Andrea was initially a priest before he was defrocked, but then he did some time for counterfeiting, but was supposedly pardoned by Teddy Roosevelt. His story was, my roommate had counterfeit money, he left it in my wife's clothes, and when the police came, I took the rap to keep my wife from going to jail, that's all. He was apparently pretty persuasive here. But upon getting out of jail, he ended up ruling the neighborhood with an iron fist. Here's how he would have looked as of about 1916, an actual photograph of him. But right here at the corner of Taylor and May was a place called Frank Lombardi's Saloon. Frank Lombardi decided to run against D'Andrea for ward committeeman. So one day in 1916, three guys came in to drink his health. Said, all right, we drink your health and happiness. They all raised their glasses. Frank Lombardi raised both of his arms. As he did, the people who had come in to toast him shot him to death. Officially, everybody assumed that D'Andrea had been behind it. There wasn't really any way to prove it one way or the other. And he, in fact, took out libel suits against the Chicago Herald and the Chicago Tribune for having suggested such a thing. But pretty much everybody believed it. He went on to win the election, of course, and then in 1921, he became the head of the Union Siciliana. That was the Sicilian Union. It was a Sicilian civic organization initially that ended up having such power over the Italian and Sicilian community that really whoever was in control of the Union was pretty much in control of the community, and by the early 1920s were effectively a front for organized crime. They were involved in all sorts of racketeering. Even well into the mid-1920s, the gangs did not dare, like Capone and guys like that, did not dare call out a hit on someone without getting approval of whoever was the head of the Union Siciliana. Trouble is, rival gangs always wanted one of their guys to be the president. And so, once you became president, your life expectancy got to be really, really short. The 1920s are just really a catalog through gang history of people becoming president of the Union and then getting shot to death. D'Andrea was shot to death at his apartment on South Ashland Street, just a little south of Taylor, in 1921, just after becoming the president. His nephew Philip D'Andrea worked for Capone for years. Now we'll zip back onto Halstead for a second here. We're starting to move into the era of organized crime now, but right over here at Taylor and Halstead, or a little bit north of there, would have stood the Holy Guardian Angels Church. See, I do have a picture of this. I couldn't find a picture of it yesterday, but this was supposedly the church at which Nicholas Viana was a choir singer. Now, when Nick Viana was arrested in 1919 for a number of murders and holdups, he said that he had been a choir singer here. And everyone believed it because by all accounts he had a great singing voice. He used to sing in prison all the time. But his story was, I was walking into choir practice one day, and on the way I stopped into Sam Cardinella's pool hall. A week later I committed my first murder. Now, his story was that Sam Cardinella was teaching boys to commit crimes, organizing them into a gang. It's almost as if he had read Oliver Twist and thought it was a how-to manual. Now, the story may have been overblown. There's pretty strong evidence that they really just wanted to pin it on Cardinella because the cops were kind of waging a war on pool halls at the time. They talked about this quite a bit. And in fact, when Viana was hanged for his 19th birthday, he sang a miserere on the way to the noose after writing out a confession that was published in the newspaper. I really doubt the confession was all really his words. The reporter probably wrote most of it and just had Nick give his approval. Hopefully he at least gave his approval. But a line that really stands out to me is his advice to boys is stay away from pool halls. He said, pool's all right, But it always leads to worse things. The next thing you know, you're playing for money in a pinchback suit, listening to some big out-of-town Jasper here to tell them all about horse race gambling. Not a wholesome trotting race, no, but a race where they sat down right on the horse. But he was hanged, his body was placed into a basket and taken to a funeral home on Blue Island Avenue, which no longer exists. This portion of Blue Island Avenue was completely removed when the University of Illinois at Chicago campus was built here. But he was brought to the Undertaker parlor here, where his friends directed the Undertaker to try to bring him back to life. This came out a couple of months later when they tried to do the same thing to Sam Cardinella, and the story that always went around was that they actually had gotten him breathing again and then stepped back and let him die again. Now, it's difficult to know exactly what happened or how close they could have come, but it's really interesting reading the Undertaker's interviews with the papers. Once this story went around, every reporter tracked down the Undertaker, and in those days we didn't have just morning papers. There were morning papers, there were afternoon papers, there were evening editions, there was the 5 o'clock edition that you could read on the train on the way home. So over the course of the day, the Undertaker story changes quite a bit. At first they're saying, well, no, nobody ever asked us anything like that. It's impossible. You can't bring a man back to life after he's been hanged. And then it's like, well, maybe if he had only been strangled and not broken his neck, we could have done it if we had a pulmotor, but we didn't have a pulmotor and nobody asked us anything like that. And then it was, well, they did ask us to do things like that, and there was a pulmotor involved, but we didn't actually try it. It wouldn't have worked. And then it's, well, we didn't try it, but it definitely probably would have worked. We probably could have gotten it to work. The sheriff always believed that they had in fact tried to revive him, and in fact had at least had some limited amount of success. This was something that was known to happen in Chicago at the time. In the 1880s, they hanged a guy and brought his body right across the street to a doctor's office just to pump him full of electricity to see what happened. And they said that they got his heart beating again, the color came back into his face, his neck was broken so they couldn't get him back up and walking around, but they knew when they took the electricity off, it was a very solemn moment because they were basically killing him again. After this, they had started to change some rules around. After people were hanged, their bodies would be left lying for a couple of hours before the family could come and pick them up. But just down the block from here, where the Tuscany restaurant is now, at 1022 West Taylor, by the mid-1920s, had become the headquarters of the Jenna brothers. Now, Viana and his friends, who incidentally will come up a bit this afternoon on the walking tour on Taylor Street, on Prairie Avenue, just missed the boat. They were arrested in 1919, right before Prohibition took over. They were still doing a lot of old-fashioned crimes. By the time Sam Cardinella and these kids were hanged, they were already people from yesterday, people from a whole different era. Now, Little Italy, after the death of D'Andrea in 1921, became the territory of the Jenna Brothers gang. Now, initially, Chicago had been controlled, the vice stuff in Chicago, the brothels, the gambling, the numbers rackets, had mostly been under the control of a guy named Big Jim Colosimo. But then Big Jim Colosimo was shot right when Prohibition started up. He had been saying he didn't want to get involved in that, so that made him a target. He was shot. There's still a lot of different theories about who did the shooting, but John Torrio, one of his lieutenants, just took over, brought in his own lieutenant, Al Capone, told all of the gangs, listen, we are definitely going to do bootleg liquor, but we are not going to fight. We're going to divide the city into territories. You take yours, we'll take ours. There's going to be plenty of money for everybody. Believe it or not, that worked for a couple of years. But then finally Dino Banyan on the north side started double-crossing Torrio. He couldn't do anything about it because Mike Merlot, who was head of the Union Siciliana at the time, didn't want any killings. But then Merlot died of natural causes. Torrio immediately called in the hit. O'Banion was shot to death in his flower shop. Supposedly, at least a rumor among the gang, was that it was by the Jenna brothers. And you can read a lot of different accounts as to who the actual shooters of Dino Banyan were to this day, but a lot of people thought it was the Jennas. The Jennas had their headquarters here on Taylor Street. They had found a loophole in the Prohibition laws saying that you could still manufacture rubbing alcohol. So all over Little Italy, people were being paid to manufacture rubbing alcohol in their basement. Now, you could work in a factory for long hours and a couple of bucks a day, or you could have a still in your basement, stir it occasionally, and get $300 a month. You could get in trouble for dealing with these guys, but the money and the money for the amount of work you had to do was just too tempting for a lot of people. But the Jenna brothers, after the death of O'Banion, became really unpopular. Now, they were officially aligned with Torrio and Capone, but after the shooting of O'Banion, whether they did it or not, everybody seems to have blamed them for the fact that the gang wars had started up. So one by one, throughout 1925 and 26, they started being shot to death. Mike Jenna was shot by a couple of guys named Scalise and Anselmi that Capone worked with off and on all the time. Tony Jenna was shot outside of a grocery store. Angelo Jenna was shot while driving his car. And then one of their brothers-in-law, Harry Spingola, was shot at a place just around the corner from here. The next day, Genevieve Forbes Herricks, the Chicago Tribune's ace crime reporter, said, he was shot by people unknown. Around Taylor and Halstead, they are always people unknown. When Mike was buried, she had one of the best lines. She overheard somebody at the cemetery saying, so Mike Jenna's being interred here, Dino Banion's over there, Mike Merlot's right over there. When Judgment Day comes and them tombs open up, there's going to be hell to pay in this cemetery. I'll move down right across the street. Well, Scalise and Anselmi managed to get off the hook. The gangs raised a fortune, an absolute fortune for their legal defense fund. They had been captured. Nobody seems to have cared that they killed Mike Jenna, but they also shot a policeman in the process. Then ran into a hat shop and switched hats which they thought would disguise them properly. It didn't work so well. But right back over here at 819 West Halstead, there was the headquarters of a guy named Giuseppe Accardi, who was the one in charge of collecting money for them. He was captured and deported, but they still managed to get off of the hook. Right across the street from there, spinning around to 814, would have been a cigar shop run by a guy named Samutz Amatuna, who is often named as the person who shot Frank Lombardi while he was toasting health and happiness a few years before. Now, in 1925, he became head of the Union Siciliana. Mike Jenna had previously been the head, but after he was shot to death, Samutz just walked into the office and said, okay, I'm the president now. And you'd think there'd be some fights over this, but I think by 1926, everybody knew this was a job with a short life expectancy. But old Samutz was known as the Dandy Gangster. He dressed in the finest of clothes, he ran a cafe and a cigar shop. But one day he was down on Roosevelt, a couple of blocks south, getting shaved and getting ready to go to the opera that night, when some gunmen broke in and shot him. He managed to hobble his way all the way up here to his cigar shop on Taylor Street, and then was taken a couple of blocks down to the hospital where he died. The shooter is sometimes said to have been Vinny the Schemer Drucci, one of the North Side gangsters who was known as Schemer because he always came up with these wild ideas like, we should go to London and steal the crown jewels, or we should run one of our guys for mayor. But Samutz Amatuna was shot and almost died in his cigar shop right here, ended up dying down the road a little bit. But history was not yet done with the Jenna brothers. Most of them were by 1926, most of them had either been shot to death or they had moved back to Sicily. But down in the corner in 1931, something happened. We're going to move down to the corner all the way to Ashland. Now over here on Ashland, people became mystified by what they called a miracle image. There was this glowing form on the back of a house that looked like a glowing image of the Virgin Mary. And not like one of the vague ones, like that one of the salt stain under the Fullerton Underpass. I could never tell what people were looking at there. But in this case, we actually have, there's actually some film footage. And this was a really big deal. By one account, about 20,000 people came to see the thing. But as you can see here, the cops solved the mystery. But here's some film footage of it from an old newsreel. This is just the crowd out there, lighting bonfires to get a better look. And here you can see the image pretty clearly. But then now and then it would just disappear. It turned out with 20,000 people here, somehow none of them noticed that across the street there was a lace curtain in a window that had that exact pattern that was shining on the wall. Turned out to be in the home of Sam Jenna, the last of the Jenna brothers still living in the area at the time. But the cops walked over to his place, knocked at the door, and said, "Say, Sam, you seen the miracle out there?" He says, "I keep trying to look, but every time I raise up my curtain to see, it disappears." It's like, well, there you go. But this was not enough. The fact that the cops solved the mystery wasn't enough to keep the crowds away. For a few weeks, people were still showing up at the place to pray to the wall. And it was definitely noticed. That was Sam Jenna, one of the old-time bootleggers, which by 1931, that's 5 or 6 years since his brothers had been killed. It was ancient history by then. There's a couple of blocks back. I mentioned they were paying guys an obscene amount of money, honestly, to do very little work. It had to be tempting, but the trouble was getting mixed up with these guys could get you into trouble. Down here in the 1400 block is the Port o' Peri Peri. The Port of Peri Peri was a place called Nash's Saloon in the early 1930s. Now, in the early 1930s, some of the gangsters realized, the beer money stuff is going to dry up soon. We got to find some new avenues, like kidnapping. So a group of gangsters kidnapped a 10-year-old kid named Billy Ranieri. Then they had to figure out what to do with a kidnapped 10-year-old and thought, hey, what about that guy who's driving our liquor trucks for us? He's got a farm with like 12 kids on it. So they went out to the farm with Billy Ranieri and said, here, you're going to take this kid. If anybody asks, nobody's going to notice you've got another kid on here, but when you get in trouble, you got to say that you kidnapped him. Otherwise, we'll kill your whole family. Eventually, they were captured and put on trial. These are the 3 guys, straight out of Central Casting. But while they were on trial, there was a witness by the name of Ole Scully who was all set to testify against the gang. But the night before he was supposed to testify, he went to Nash's place. And while he was in Nash's place, 5 guys with baseball bats came busting into the place. I'll just show very briefly the picture. It's a pretty unpleasant picture. But these guys were all found guilty and sent to jail. And not long ago, a couple of years back, I got a phone call from one of their grandchildren who said, well, his version of the story was the gang had come and said, you have to take this kid in, otherwise we're going to kill you. If you go to jail, we'll take care of your family. He did go to jail. The cops did not take care of his family. Eventually, he got out of jail and was loud enough that some of his grandchildren still remember him, though the stories aren't necessarily pleasant. The guy on the left got out of prison and just went back to committing more and nastier crimes than he had been accused of in the first place, I think. Let's back up a little bit more. So that's the lesson. It might be tempting to get involved with the gangsters, but no good will come of it in the end. There's one guy... There's one great one. After a beer truck driver got shot, another one said, after all of this, I'm through. I wouldn't peddle orange pop at a Sunday school picnic anymore. Right here you can see, this is clearly not one of the older buildings, but right here at the 1200 block of West Taylor, at Taylor and Racine, was the last fire by the arson queen of Chicago. It was a woman named, there was an arson ring. People who would get tips on people who wanted to get the insurance money on their buildings, so they would sneak in and set fires to the place. It was generally people that no one would notice, that no one would suspect. They would take a certain fee for it. But then, after this place burned down, Bertha, the queen of the arson ring, found out that they had left one of his handicapped children upstairs. He wanted to cash in on that insurance money, too. She hadn't signed up for this. She hadn't been planning to kill anybody, so she went to the cops and said, I'm the arson queen. If I tell you everything, you think I can get off the hook? So she turned in the whole rest of the gang. It was a woman named Bertha Warshawski, mother of 6, grandmother of 9, who turned out to be the biggest arson queen in Chicago. It's really interesting reading her testimony, because she's using a lot of, arsonist slang. She would get together and say, well, we got the bills, so we went to make the balls. Making balls meant wadding up big balls of paper and soaking them in gasoline. She had invented her own kind of fuse that connected to these things so she could light the fuse and walk away. And nobody ever looked at her and assumed that she might be an arson queen. She would have gotten away with this for years, most likely, if she hadn't decided to turn herself in. With help from detectives. The next time she had a meeting, she had a detective disguised as a hobo with a little red wagon full of kindling. Nobody paid any notice. They just thought he was a guy who was going to help start the fire. All right, low on time, so we're going to go to where the tour ends. And this is going backwards in time, and it's so far before everything else. Wrong button there. But down at Taylor and Ashland is the site where 2 out of 3 Chicago's public executions took place. The first public hanging in Chicago was in 1840. That was down on the South Side Dunes. There wasn't another one until 1857. And by then, the city had been built up tremendously based on how it looked in 1840. And when they designated that there would be public executions, they took place on what is now Ashland, right between Taylor and Polk. The first was a guy by the name of William Jackson. Now, William Jackson was an itinerant who just kind of wandered the country. But one day up in the north suburbs, he was found trying to sell a horse and buggy at a price so cheap that everybody assumed that he had stolen it. Some people tried to pursue him outside of town. They ended up having a fight. He killed one of the pursuers before being captured and was hanged out here. It was a muddy, muddy day, but people followed the procession all the way from the Loop, all the way about 2 miles out to here, through like ankle-deep mud. With the crowd was estimated between 5,000 and 10,000 people came to see the hanging. H.H. Honore, the father of Bertha Palmer, took advantage of this. He was building a house just down the road from here, but was having some labor troubles. The people building the roof had quit, so he just got his friends to come in and say, hey, if you come work on my roof, we'll have a perfect view of that hanging. This would eventually be the house in which Carter Harrison Sr. was assassinated in 1893. But 1858, there was another guy named Alfred Staub who was executed in the same place. And once again, the crowds had gotten so rowdy that the newspaper started saying editorials saying, we've got to stop doing this. It's supposed to be for dissuading people from committing crimes, but people are getting their pockets picked while they go to watch it. And the next year, they did change everything. By the time there was another hanging in Chicago, it was done within the confines of the prison. But right down the road from here, also on the other block down, was where DeAndrea was eventually shot outside of his apartment. Rumor was at the time that the shooter was Samut Samatuna. Possible to know for sure. It's kind of the trouble with these things. With a gang story, when you try to figure out where it came from, half the time you'll find that it came from a movie. And other times you'll find that it's like a 1970s pulp, and others there might be a primary source, but that primary source is a friend of a friend of a friend of a guy whose middle name was The. Now, so we've got layers and layers of unreliable sources and conflicting accounts on these things, and it's impossible to know which one might be true. But alright, that is most of the stories. I gotta keep it kind of short today because I gotta go do the in-person tour. So a quick plug for the upcoming events. Next in-person one is Saturday, July 31st, 11 a.m., Graceland Cemetery. Really my signature tour. I think the cemetery tours are the things that I do best. In-person tickets are available at MysteriousChicago.com. Next virtual one, Thursday night, is a brand new virtual tour of Strange Tales from Lincoln Park and Lakeview. Stories like this from around that particular neighborhood. It's a brand new one. I haven't done a new one in a while now. Then next Sunday, a week from today, I was thinking, all of this heat. I love doing these tours, but some of them are just better when it's virtual. And in the summer, anyway. I'm literally looking forward to doing a boat tour in person in October, but we're going to do it virtually on Sunday. This will be a tour where you don't have to worry about the heat. You don't have to worry about paying to park. Nobody's going to take a picture and then try to sell you a copy of that picture. You can just kick back, relax, drink whatever you want, have a mimosa, drink as much as you want, and don't worry about falling overboard. Just come hang out here with us. That'll be next Sunday at 10 a.m. All right, so if you need a Mysterious Chicago t-shirt, sweatshirt, coffee mug, etc., just go to cafepress.com/MysteriousChicago. They've got everything you need there, including the brand new shirt for the upcoming Mystericon. If you're on the Mysterious Chicago Regulars and Miles Fan Club Facebook group, we are doing a convention October 1st through 3rd. They've got a block of rooms with a great rate at the Palmer House. So we'll be doing this in style. I'll be doing a boat tour. Mandy and Layla from effing Chicago are going to do some events as well. And now you can get this awesome Mystericon t-shirt already. So, alright everybody, thanks a lot for joining me once again. We'll put some Earl Father Hines back on, and I am going to hang out a little bit until it's time to head downtown. Or grab some lunch and then head downtown to do the in-person tour. The good thing is Prairie Avenue has a lot of leaf coverage. There should be some shade. Alright, thanks Nina. And thanks Andrea. I think that was a cool way to do this one chronologically instead of geographically. Thanks everybody. Patty, we're still putting together some more of the details, but the details that exist are on the mysterious Chicago Regulars and Miles fan club group. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, that group in the Patreon will have first dibs on the tickets for these things. And if you're on the Patreon's great. You get a Chicago history story every week, a coyote in a cemetery photo every week. On the next tier up, you also get a whole bunch of old articles for deeper research on the history story. And Friday is H.H. Holmes Day for that tier. Plus, there's still some slots available for the free ticket a month tour. Did I ever go to summer camp? No, I never went to summer camp. I always love movies that take place at summer camp. Meatballs 2, Ernest Goes to Camp. No, I never really went, other than like Parks and Rec stuff. See you, Kristen. I'm more worried about the people on Prairie Avenue getting a restraining order on me. Well, no, it's not like every other tour company doesn't do tours down there. Thanks, Joanne. Yeah, Jeannie, your family had a pretty popular club there in the Bronzeville area. Good luck, Eleanor. I can't hang out as long as usual today, so I gotta go do the in-person. My initial plan was I wasn't gonna do a virtual tour this morning, but... Oh, the Vipers are coming? There's a version of that in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. I am the Viper. I will be here in 10 minutes. I am the Viper. I will be there in 2 minutes. I am the Viper. I am here to vipe your windows. Hey, Rodney. Once again, in case there was a brief typo that said that the tour was going to start today at Hull House. That was last night tour, actually starting 205 East 18th Street.
And now comes up number 8 on our program of dancing, a tune titled, melodically, A Little Kiss at Twilight.
I say, yeah, let me find where Miles went. Oh, here he is. Hey, Miles, you want to chase a little? Miles is sitting in a box over here, one of his boxes. Hey, Miles, the people want to see it. You've been eating this box, haven't you? You're not supposed to eat boxes. Those are not chew toys. There's the guy himself. Miles, let him see your pretty face. He loves to sit in boxes that aren't really quite big enough for him. Don't you, Miles? Yeah, Carol, there'll be plenty of mob stuff on Thursday night at the on the virtual Lincoln Park and Lakeview tour. There you go, buddy. You're not quite big enough box that your legs are hanging out of. Marissa, theoretically I get the money from the stars. I don't think I've gotten a payout yet, but it's got them all collected in my account. When I'm broadcasting on Restream like this, I don't really get the alerts on them. I have to go back later and see whether anybody donated them. It's easier to just cut Facebook out of the equation and use Venmo or PayPal. Yeah, stars are something where you buy them from Facebook and then give them to me. It's kind of complicated. Thanks, Marissa. Joanne, I do eventually get the stars money. I just don't think I actually have yet. They don't have, like, they only just started doing them. It's probably like 6 weeks before you get a payout. Like with Cafe Press, I get, like, I don't get a ton of money from the Cafe Press sales, but it's usually like 2 months later or 3 months later I get some. It's alright, Octavio. Yeah, I'm not sure how much of a cut Facebook takes, if any. It's weird. But I'm confident that I'll eventually get it. Carol, Zelle is good. Zelle is the same email as the PayPal. The trick is if I get a whole bunch at once, they get suspicious. Thanks, Amy. It looks really cool. I got my water bottle in the freezer right now. Let's see what it's estimating for my travel time for today. Not about what I thought. Thanks, Carol. It's checking the star thing is kind of complicated. When I'm broadcasting on the phone, I get alerts. When I'm broadcasting from home, I don't. Jason, yes. Details about that. I'm not the one booking the rooms, but it's over on the Mysterious Chicago Regulars page. Thanks, Ava. Have a good day. That sounds like a good day. Suzanne, I don't listen to this same show when I'm not doing the tour, but just this morning over on my turntable is this terrific one, Blue Rose, Rosemary Clooney, and Duke Ellington Orchestra. If you haven't heard this record, look it up. It is fantastic. I think it's Rosemary Clooney's first album that she did, with Duke Ellington and his orchestra doing a selection of Ellington material. Thanks, Donna. Heather, I will. I know the Dead Ringer shirts, they decided it was too close to the Beatles logo, so there's certain of them that they're not letting people get, and I can't seem to get them off. Laura, yeah, I've kind of missed the Benny Goodman of the Congress, too, but when I'm broadcasting on here, I tend to get copyright dings on it. All right, have a good day, Karen. You guys know it. For the in-person today, I will definitely try to keep us in the shade.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a program for you epicures. You swing epicures who like your music really jived in top style. Alright, I'm gonna send out, I've already sent out one email on the Eventbrite to make sure everybody gets the right address for today's in-person tour. I'm gonna send out another one, grab a quick bite to eat, and then I gotta get going to head downtown. So alright everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. Earl Father Hines is wrapping up. So one more quick plug for the upcoming events. Next Saturday's in-person tour is really probably my signature tour, Graceland Cemetery. Tickets on sale at MysteriousChicago.com. Before that, Thursday night, we're doing Lincoln Park and Lakeview, a brand new virtual tour with a lot of stories similar to what I told today, but in a whole different neighborhood. Also hidden architectural gems, strange hoax stories, all kinds of cool stuff. Then Sunday morning, a week from today, we are going to beat the heat by doing an architectural boat tour virtually. Pour yourself a mimosa, kick back in the air conditioning, and enjoy. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. I'll see some of you down in the South Loop area in just a few minutes. Just a couple hours, anyway. So, all right, everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. I'm Adam Seltzer of Mysterious Chicago Tour, saying stay safe, stay strong, stay cool. And, of course, if you can, stay spooky.